Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's ASEAN Midday Market Watch. Our guest today is Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank in Singapore. Now, Vishnu, great to have you on the show this Wednesday afternoon.
Always good to be here, Brian.
Now, Vishnu, markets are behaving very interestingly, but let's take a look at the various numbers across the region and then get your insights. Now, we've got Bursa Malaysia, which is down very sharply, 1.73% at 1,581.43. We've got the SGX is at 3,188.87. It's down marginally, 0.06%. Across the region, you've got Nikkei, which is down 0.7% at 29,228.59. Shanghai Composite is at 3,435.46, down 0.61%. Hang Seng is down 0.31% at 28,488.81. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got the ASX 200, which is up 1.48% at 6,839.9. And rounding off, we've got the KOSPI, which is pretty flattish at 0.09% up at 3,072.64. What's your view on this mixed bag of performance across markets this morning?
Thank you, Brian. I shall steal your term mixed bag, and then I'll follow that up with saying that this is the equivalent of the three blind men filling up the elephant. That sounded a bit wrong, but whether it's three or six, everyone comes off with a different view. And I think essentially it boils down to this. It boils down to trying to discern and trying to distill whether and what the reflation impact on different markets will be. So it is widely accepted now that we are in a phase of recovery, but it is also sobering enough for us to know that we are all at different speeds and the recovery remains uneven. And during this time, when you get costs going up because of the reflation bets and commodities reacting, you get very different outcomes in very different markets. And that's, I think, further complicated by the fact that you've got a coincident and perhaps a causation there, a rise in US Treasury yields, which can also impact different EMs very differently, depending on whether they've got high real yields, low real yields, high debt exposure, low debt exposure, inflation risks, so on and so forth. So I think you are right in saying it's a mixed bag. And I think there's a lower conviction about sorting out that bag very quickly. I think we will still be digesting and chewing on this for a while.
Now, I'm going to come back to you on the Treasury yields discussion later on when we speak about the US stimulus package. But we just had the Chinese Purchasing Managers Index that came in at 51.9. Now that's sharply up from expectations compared to February's reading of 50.6. Now, what's your read on this better than expected numbers?
Well, I think I won't read too deeply into it. I mean, we continue to hold on to our view that China is positioned to exit from this pandemic very nicely. They've handled the containment very well, and they have actually benefited from the pandemic demand. And I think they are quickly shifting it across. And there's been initial evidence of some spillover into the domestic and service sector. So that is good for China's economy. But equally, China will have to grapple with the specter of asset bubbles and how to best contain it with policy. So I think we're looking at a fairly resilient recovery for China, but not one that's going to be absolutely exhilarating either. So we're going to get that China picture not changing. And at the backdrop is the question of how US-China relations pan out. And we also want to see how China's dual circulation fits with Biden's $3 or maybe $4 trillion infrastructure plan that will, markets are waiting for today alongside the OPEC meeting.
Now, do you hold that view that this Chinese recovery will particularly impact positively markets in ASEAN, given the whole dual circulation strategy?
I mean, certainly. I mean, we've held this view for a while that, in the last decade or so, or even spanning further than that, anything that's good for China is good for ASEAN. However, we think the dual circulation means two things. One, it means there's going to be more focus on the domestic economy, which means the positive spillover into ASEAN may be reduced in magnitude. So the amount of positive multipliers into ASEAN could reduce. And secondly, it could realign such that North Asia could benefit more insofar that China is trying to acquire the high-end side of the manufacturing scale and know-how. And that's where I think North Asia is I think, seated in a very nice place to leverage on that.
Now, investors are anticipating that the US economy is going to run even hotter than it is after President Biden kind of lays out his long-term economic plan with the stimulus that will come with it, of course, with some tax increases as well. But what is the implication on this on various asset classes, given that there's going to be so much more liquidity pumped into the US economy?
I mean, generally speaking, when you get a lot more liquidity out there, and that's essentially cheap money, you tend to get, these tend to chase asset markets. And so you get overall asset price inflation, particularly for real assets. So you would find equities would start rallying on the prospect of revenues becoming more, or cash flows increasing substantially, and as well as just the very fact that households are sitting on more savings and there's more cash coming in. So there will be both institutional and household money chasing assets that people are familiar with. But there will also be a good degree of differentiation depending on who is going to benefit most from the details that will be embedded in the infrastructure plan that Biden is going to lay out. So there's a sense that renewables, green technology, and these could I think do a nice catch-up trade or even an overtake trade if we do see the details coming out in favor of that.
Do you see any sort of, and that would seem a possibility of ASEAN then riding on this bandwagon, given that many ASEAN economies are also gearing now into to take advantage of growth in those sectors?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. To a large extent, I think ASEAN is well positioned for this. If you think about it, the kind of deficits that the US will be running will be unprecedented. And by definition, all deficits will have to be either taken care of by spending onshore or offshore. And the US cannot produce everything it wants to create in terms of its infrastructure plan. So it needs to import more. And given the US-China tensions, we see a greater degree of spillover where ASEAN can benefit by being the providers of what the US economy is looking to build over the next 5 to 10 years. And so it is some way to US reaching the kind of self-sufficiency in manufacturing, if it can. In the meantime, ASEAN is well placed to benefit.
Now, Vishnu, this is a short week because it's an Easter holiday, long weekend. What are the key data points for the next 2 days that we should be watching out for in key events as well? Obviously, the one that sticks out is the non-farm payrolls on Friday.
I think definitely, Brian. And one thing we can say is that the markets can surely make a short week look like a long one. And I think what they're really focused on would be what the details of the Biden plan will entail if those are revealed later tonight. OPEC meeting will also be interesting to watch to see whether or not OPEC reacts to some of that supply disruption due to the Suez Canal issue, as well as the Biden plan, whether they're reacting to that and seeing demand rising, so increasing supply or not. So these are some of the particular markets that we're going to watch. In addition, I think it's also worth watching maybe the details of what you just suggested. So it's rather the details in non-farm payrolls than the headlines that will be important because it'll tell us about the sustained improvement in the job market.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vishnu, again for your insights.
My pleasure.
Now, we've been speaking to Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank on BizTech's ASEAN Midday Market Watch. I'm Brian Fernandez. Check out www.biztech.asia for business and technology conversation.